He's been in office for 100 days. Zimbabwe's new president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, is under pressure to improve the economy and curb corruption. But is there any change from the Robert Mugabe era? And is Mnangagwa up to the challenge? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Hazem, Sika. Zimbabwe was once regarded as Africa's breadbasket with its rich, fertile farmland and flourishing export market. But after almost 4 decades of Robert Mugabe's rule, its economy is in a mess, unemployment rates are high, and human rights remain an issue. Emmerson Mnangagwa pledged he would rebuild the country, promising to take radical steps. So what progress after 100 days as president? We'll talk to our guests shortly, but first, Matyszak reports from Harare.
Charles Malunga was laid off years ago. He used to work for Zisco Steel, which was once one of Africa's largest steel factories. Charles is now a part-time handyman in his neighborhood. He says not being able to properly provide for his family is humiliating.
We've been living from hand to mouth most of the days. And some nights we could go without eating dinner, a meal. And you know, it's so hard for a father not to supply for his family. You know, so it's been hard from 2008 up to today.
The steel factory where Charles worked is now an industrial graveyard. It used to employ more than 5,000 workers and produced 1 million tons of steel annually. Now Zimbabwe imports $400 million worth of steel every year. President Emmerson Mnangagwa is under pressure to deliver. His administration insists it is making progress, repairing relations with Western powers and international financial institutions.
What we've been sold by this government is the promise of change, that although they've been part of the old regime, they seem to be committed to some form of change and some traction. And also, to be fair, out of the 83 promises, we've seen traction around 33 issues.
But opposition politicians say not much has changed in the 100 days since Mnangagwa took over from Robert Mugabe.
So you missed that opportunity by failing to frame a government that was consistent with the aspirations of the people. So from there it has been downward. Now it's business as usual. The public is very skeptical.
Reviving dilapidated infrastructure needs foreign direct investment. The US has extended targeted sanctions for another year, saying not much has changed since Mnangagwa took over. The sanctions were imposed nearly 20 years ago for alleged human rights abuses. Economists warn this could scare away potential investors. Industry experts say real economic recovery could take at least 3 years. Right now, people can't access money from banks, and the unemployment rate is one of the highest in the world. After years of neglect, some roads are getting a facelift. Some people say that's a small positive sign. But political analysts say the road to real economic recovery in Zimbabwe will be long and bumpy. Matyszak, Al Jazeera, Harare.
As Harris said in her report, transforming Zimbabwe's economy and tackling high levels of unemployment are Mnangagwa's priority, but he's also pledged to curb corruption. He's proposed setting up anti-corruption courts and has arrested several high-profile figures. He said he would be, in his words, the president of all citizens, regardless of colour, religion, tribe or political affiliation. And he vowed to do all he could to ensure elections this year will be free and fair. He's also promised compensation for white farmers whose land was seized as part of Mugabe's land reforms. Let's bring in our guests now. Joining us in Harare is Obert Gutu, a spokesman for the opposition Movement for Democratic Change Party, the MDC. From London, we have Nick Mangwana, the ruling Zanu-PF party's representative in the UK and mainland Europe. And also in Zimbabwe's capital via Skype, Derek Matyszak, a researcher who writes about the political and security dynamics in the country. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. So, Nick Mangwana, let me start with you. How would you, after 100 days, assess the job that Mr. Mnangagwa has done?
The president's first 100 days in office have been very successful in the sense that the whole purpose of them was to set fundamentals and economic drivers that will change the fortunes of Zimbabwe, that will change the climate, the ecosystem of Zimbabwe's political system, that will cleanse it and bring in a bit more hygiene, clean it up, make people a bit more free, the removal of roadblocks, for example, the reach out, the hand that has been extended to the opposition, the freedom that has been given the opposition to operate unfettered and unhindered. Those are very good signs. So the bridges that has been built with former foes, the ones that have been consolidated with former friends, all those are fundamentals that are very important for us to get what we need most above the rest, which is foreign direct investment. Like you said, like that was said in the intro there are people that haven't worked for a long time, and there are people that have never worked in Zimbabwe. Those people need jobs. And like President Mnangagwa has always said, he has said it always in triplicates, jobs, jobs, jobs. So the fundamentals to bring the jobs to the people have been put in place. Corruption is being curbed, like you rightly said. Courts are being set up in every province, which are specialist courts to deal with corruption. Corruption has played a big role in our economic demise. So all the right things are being said, all the right noises are being, all the right things are being done, and all the right noises is being made.
Well, just to clarify, Mr. Mangwana, we didn't actually say corruption has been curbed. We said that was one of the objectives that the president has. But I want to ask you a little bit more about that. What specific steps has he taken in the first 100 days?
Like I rightly said, the most problematic thing in our fight against corruption was one was we were getting a lot of lip service. Two, no fundamental political will or no evident political will was there. Now, the framework for setting up provincial anti-corruption specialist anti-corruption courts in every province of Zimbabwe would mean that we now have got something measurable. We would expect those courts to be very busy every time. We're not going to have courts which are white elephants. So if the courts are very busy, it basically means that in every province, in every region of the country, all the people that are accused of corruption, every person who is suspected of having been involved in corruption would be arraigned before those courts and will have their day. And that is what is needed in corruption, in a fight against corruption, to deter people. Because once people see somebody being paraded in courts, being humiliated in court, or even going to prison, more importantly, then it basically means that the next person who is thinking of rigging, for example, a tender, who is thinking of doing something which is untoward or underhand, would think twice before doing that. So that's the deterrent that we need. So, like I said, the best thing that has happened in the 100 days is to set the fundamentals, is to put in place the building blocks that will drive both his political and economic agenda.
All right, let's get the view from somebody from the opposition then. Obert Gutu, what's your take on this? Do you think that Zimbabwe is heading in the right direction as a member of the opposition? Do you feel that you are living in a freer country now?
Not at all. In fact, the first 100 days of President Mnangagwa's presidency have been a very huge disappointment. It has been a big yawn. This is why you find that although he has been talking about a new era, word on the street in Harare and other major cities and towns and even in the villages in Zimbabwe, is that it is actually not a new era, but a new era. Because the past 3 months have actually seen an unprecedented deterioration of the ordinary people's living standards. I'll be specific here and say that the past 3 months have actually seen a shocking increase in the prices of basic goods and commodities. Here I'm talking about things that people use every day in their lives, you know, cooking oil, toothpaste, bread, milk, you know, mealie meal. This is ordinary people's lifestyles. If you were going to buy something at, say, $1 in November last year upon the ascendancy to power of President Mnangagwa, if you go to your local supermarket today, you are most likely going to pay 3 times as much for the same commodity. There has been an unprecedented, as I've already said, increase in the prices of goods. And when you look at also the promises that the new administration has been given to the people, we have actually witnessed numerous promises. They've been very long on promises and extremely short on delivery. I'll give another specific example. We were actually promised, as the people of Zimbabwe, by the new administration of President Mnangagwa, that they were going to exercise media freedom. They were going to obey the constitutional provisions regarding access to the state-controlled, or rather the publicly owned, both print and an electronic media in this country. But what do we notice under the Mnangagwa presidency? We are actually witnessing the same kind of trajectory as used to happen under Robert Mugabe's presidency. We actually can say it is the same script, the same act, the same drama, apparently with different actors. If you tune in to what is called News Hour, the main television news bulletin in this country at 8 p.m. local time, Zimbabwe time, all you read, all you see, all you view is news about President Emmerson Mnangagwa. If you don't hear or see him doing something somewhere, you are going to be subjected to seeing his wife, the First Lady, Mrs. Auxilia Mnangagwa, the same template that Robert Mugabe used to follow. So what Mnangagwa has simply done is to substitute Robert Mugabe and Grace Mugabe with Emmerson Mnangagwa and Auxilia Mnangagwa. This is why I'm saying it is like putting old wine in new bottles. It remains the same old wine. The only difference is that it is now packaged differently.
All right.
But the taste and everything
we'll come back.
about the wine is the same. So the first 100 days have been a huge disappointment.
All right, we'll come back to some of that in a moment, but I want to bring in Derek Matyszak. I know 100 days is not a long time in the general scheme of things, but how would you assess the Mnangagwa era so far?
Well, you've had 2 politicians talking, so both of them are putting their particular political angle on their perception of the first 100 days. Mr. Mangwana's statement, for example, that the economy is being sorted out by tackling corruption, well, there's an element of truth there, but that needs to be unpacked a little. It's plainly obvious to everybody that the people who are being targeted for corruption are Mr. Mnangagwa's political enemies, and Mr. Mnangagwa's political allies, many of whom are known to be corrupt, are being left alone. Furthermore, there's more indication of politicization of the anti-corruption campaign in that the instances of corruption are being chosen carefully so that they are discrete instances that only involve Mr. Mnangagwa's political enemies. So if you have a corrupt enterprise which has involved people across the factional divide, those kind of corruption or those instances of corruption are being left alone. Then turning to some of Mr. Gutu's comments, it's not correct that prices have risen steeply since Mr. Mnangagwa came into office. In fact, the opposite has taken place. There's a differential between the value of electronic money, electronic dollars, which are created by government, and actual US dollars. And the black market rate between electronic or cyber money and the real US dollars has actually dropped. So before Mr. Mnangagwa came into power, the differential was as high as 1.9. It's now dropped down to about 1.5. And this affects the price of products in the supermarket and has brought the price of products down. So that is certainly one of the successes. Obviously, there's a long way to go. The creation of cyber money needs to stop. But the problem for Mr. Mnangagwa is the size of the hole that Robert Mugabe has dug before he came into office. And for Mnangagwa to try and climb out of that hole is going to be an extremely difficult task. And to try and get the economy back on a proper footing is certainly going to take much longer than 100 days. And it will take even an extended period of time before even small effects can be felt in recovering from the disastrous economic policies of the Mugabe administration.
Let's come back to Nick Mangwana on this then. I know you want to respond to some of what you've just heard there, and also to Obert Gutu's points earlier that nothing has really changed, and this is basically just another version of the Mugabe era. What do you say to that?
You know, Mr. Gutu, he tends to prefer very flourish language and hyperboles. The truth is, the election dates have not been promulgated yet. So the programs that are coming out on state television are the programs that the president is running, not campaign programs. The news is talking about is what the president is doing, what the nation is doing as a president. The plan that is in place right now is that there will be a media commission which will supervise the media coverage that's given to all political parties to bring equity among them. That media commission will start operating the moment the elections are declared, that we are in a campaign season. At the moment, it's just a government functioning. The state media normally operates as the media of record for the government. So yes, when they say when they propagate what the president is doing or what the president has done, they are doing that in his capacity as the state president, not in his capacity as the Zanu-PF first secretary and president. So if we make that distinction, that helps. Now, when it comes to freedoms, we're talking of 100 days. Within these 100 days, under the old dispensation, we would have had a lot of people having been arrested or arraigned before the courts for some charges which have something to do with subverting the authorities, undermining the president's authority, or undermining the first family or something like that. This has not happened in this new dispensation. Nobody has been arrested for something as mundane as those charges. That's freedom. We have spoken of roadblocks not being on the road. The extortionate demands by the police from the citizens and the traveling public has not been witnessed. That's gone. Those are positives we're talking about. When there is a police checkpoint every 5 kilometers within urban areas or something like that.
You mentioned about the checkpoints as well, and that those are gone. And I want to get Obert Gutu's response to that. That there have been some changes made that have improved quality of life, according to Mr. Mangwana. What do you say to that?
Not at all, not at all. Because for us who live here in Zimbabwe, we don't see any difference between the Robert Mugabe presidency and the Mnangagwa presidency. Of course, Nick might be seeing things differently. Because,
are you still seeing checkpoints? Are you still seeing people getting arrested?
No, not at all. I'll give you an example. A few weeks ago, there were some human rights activists in the second largest city of Zimbabwe called Bulawayo. They wanted to stage a demonstration to do with the Gukurahundi issue. They were wrapped up by the police, beaten up, and typically the same way that Mugabe would react. And just a week ago, we witnessed an incident where the Ndebele people, who are the majority people in the southern provinces or the southwestern provinces, who wanted to have a coronation or an installation of the Ndebele king. There was a lot of pressure from the government to say, no, we can't have a Ndebele king installed because that will be tantamount to treason, that will be tantamount to creating a separate state and all those kind of other fascist excuses. But we are saying, look at South Africa, for instance. South Africa is a republic. And you know what? There are 7 kingdoms in South Africa, the most prominent of which obviously is the kingdom of KwaZulu-Natal, where King Zwelithini, Goodwill Zwelithini, is the king. But the South African government has got absolutely no problems with that. But here we have a problem with the government that becomes very jittery, that becomes very agitated, simply because the Ndebele people wanted to have an installation or a coronation of the Ndebele king. This is typically fascist Robert Mugabe. Let me also move on to the issue of corruption.
Quickly, if you can, because
like what Derek has been saying,
move the discussion
all
on.
what has happened, all what has been happening is the targeting of Mnangagwa's political enemies. We know that some of the biggest and most corrupt people are actually found in Mnangagwa's own faction of Zanu-PF. And these people, none of them has been brought before the courts. It's only what I call small-time crooks who have been arrested. And all of these apparently belong to the so-called G40 faction, the Robert Mugabe and Grace Mugabe faction.
Derek
Not
Matyszak,
a single politician
how important is it?
Of the Lacoste faction has been arrested.
Derek Matyszak, if we move on to the upcoming elections in Zimbabwe, this is seen as the real test, or it's going to be seen as the real test of democratic progress in Zimbabwe, to see if Mr. Mnangagwa's talk of reforms are genuine here. Have you seen any indications at this point that we will get a free and fair election in Zimbabwe later this year?
Yes, certainly. I think some of the rhetoric around free and fair elections will be implemented. It's definitely in Mr. Mnangagwa's interests to have an election which appears on the surface to be largely free and fair. Mr. Mnangagwa has a problem with legitimacy because of the manner in which he attained power. He's not an elected president at the moment. So he's desperate to attain legitimacy through a free and fair election. So I think he'll go as far as he can to make sure that the elections have an appearance of freeness and fairness. But that then also touches on what Mr. Gutu was saying about the media. The media is definitely a ruling party mouthpiece. It's not public media. The only voice that is heard in the rural areas on the electronic media is the voice of Zanu-PF, and it's insufficient, as Mr. Mangwana would have us believe, that just to open up the airwaves during an election period. Those airwaves need to be opened up permanently and well in advance of the elections to have any impact.
All right,
so already the closure of media space is impacting on the freeness and fairness of the election.
Let's put that point then to Nick Mangwana. Shouldn't there be equal time for all the parties in Zimbabwe from now?
There should be equal times if people are campaigning. That's what I'm saying, that officially, you don't see President Mnangagwa on a campaign trail. Yes, he might do one or two Zanu-PF programs, but the campaign hasn't opened yet. So the state media reports on government programs. That's the difference we're making. But coming to that as well, I mean, there's no question that we should have equity when we start campaigning. There's no doubt about that. Having said that, the state media is now a very small part of electronic media out there. We have a lot of space in the social media platforms where there are no limits in Zimbabwe. There is no restrictions that we see or suppression or suppressive laws that we see in other countries. So a lot is being broadcast on social media already. So in terms of access to different sort of media, it is there. When it comes to the radio, even Voice of America broadcasts now very freely. We don't even hear it being called the pirate station that people used to call it, and so on. Zanu-PF appears there, and on all other independent. There are more papers which are anti-Zanu-PF right now being published in Zimbabwe than those which are pro-Zanu-PF.
We are going to have to leave it there.
In terms of media space, really it's open.
We could spend a lot more time talking about this, but unfortunately we are out of time. I want to thank all three of you, Obert Gutu, Nick Mangwana and Derek Matyszak. Thanks very much for being on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. As always, you can see this program again anytime by going to our website, aljazeera.com. And for more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle there is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hazem, Sika, and the whole team here, bye for now.